This is Rummy's Horror Review. Throughout the long, rich history of horror films, there have been many outstanding scream queens who helped shape the genre, and this is especially true of the ever-evolving slasher subgenre. In that regard, Jamie Lee Curtis is perhaps the most famous example, specifically for her portrayal of the goody two-shoes babysitter, Laurie Strode. While other films such as Black Christmas helped pave the way for Halloween, in terms of slasher films, the original Halloween can be viewed as a reasonable starting point for modern-day slashers, and Curtis was very much a pioneer in that regard, paving the way for all that followed. Now, a case can be made for the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, with Marilyn Burns' chilling portrayal of Sally. And one could also even maybe make a case for Psycho, where Curtis's own mother brilliantly played the role of Marion Crane. But the point stands that Jamie Lee could reasonably be viewed as the gold standard here, even if you believe modern slashers predate the original Halloween. That being said, in my humble opinion, 4 of the greatest to ever do it were the final girls from the original 4 Friday the 13th movies. Directed by Sean S. Cunningham, Friday the 13th was one of many Halloween imitators that followed, but Friday the 13th was inherently unique in its own right, which helped it evolve into one of the most successful horror franchises of all time. Sure, the similarities extend to the mysterious murder opening, followed by a long passage of time in both movies. But one of the biggest things that helped Friday the 13th establish its own identity was largely the location, a secluded area surrounded by the peace and quiet that came with the territory of the remote forest surrounding a beautiful lake. That combined with a bunch of carefree young adults acting like idiots, the masterful musical score from Harry Manfredini, and state-of-the-art gore from the master of horror effects himself, the one and only Tom Savini, it all blended together for a magical formula, rich with atmosphere, and the Alice Hardy character, played by Adrienne King, was a very big part of what made it all work. Right out of the gate, we learn that Alice is handy. She is a talented sketch artist who is always too busy to satisfy her passion, and she appears to be in some kind of quasi-courtship with the hippie head counselor Steve Christie, but Alice is uncertain of her current path in life. Despite pondering a changing course, she remains a diligent worker trying to help Christie prepare to reopen the camp. These traits largely define who she was as a character, and this enabled her to become such a terrific final girl. While Christie is off running errands, Alice enjoys life and bonds with the fellow counselors. And this is not without its fair share of drama, between Nettie acting like a complete asshole who faked drowning to cop a feel, to that pesky snake slithering around under her bed which left them all mesmerized, to Crazy Ralph creeping around the premises with his doom and gloom prophecies. It was a day filled with excitement. After the wild day, the crew just wants to relax and have fun. But there are problems with the power, a big storm rolls in, and more disturbing still, a mystery assailant begins brutally murdering the counselors one by one. But the living counselors are none the wiser, and Alice even gets involved in a naughty game of Monopoly, which further differentiates her from the babysitting goody two-shoes who is Laurie Strode. Alice is all fired up for the game, and while this is happening, the rest of the counselors who are missing out on the game are getting carved up. The Monopoly action gets cut short when the storm becomes violent. From the moment Alice and Bill first suspect something might be amiss, Alice proves strong, resourceful, and quick on her feet. After the power generator gets cut off by the mystery killer, poor Alice is soon all alone, and she realizes she is in a life and death situation when she discovers Bill's body. Alice then proceeds to put together a barricade for the ages, doing everything in her power to arduously ensure no one gains entry. She arms herself and prepares for battle, but the killer tosses Brenda through the window. A car pulls up, and Alice tears the barricade down in mere seconds, wasting her previous effort, figuratively illustrating one of the key themes of the genre, where everything is wasted because almost everyone dies. Then we are introduced to Mrs. Voorhees, which was a bit of a cop-out considering the film had a whodunit vibe, and the only real suspect we had to this point was Crazy Ralph. Mrs. Voorhees literally came out of nowhere, a red herring transformed into one of movies' most famous killers. All the same, we get the Jason origin story of what set her off, which would ultimately become the centerpiece of the entire franchise, notwithstanding Roy's brief stint as a subsequent fill-in. This leads to the final chase sequence, which is a bit drawn out, with a lot of rinse and repeat, somewhat typical of these early efforts. But the scenes between King and Palmer are compelling, and Alice's fighting spirit is admirable, making her easy to root for, even if it was frustrating watching her incapacitate the killer time and time again, only to let her off the hook. But that's the way it goes even in recent films, where the audience's frustration fuels the narrative. Manfredini's haunting score works brilliantly with the secluded, isolated surroundings, and the cat and mouse game extends on. Eventually, Alice emerges triumphant, beheading her would-be killer. But the final scene that forever immortalized Alice was the iconic scare in the canoe, where Alice is attacked by young Jason. It was a cleverly inserted final scare when it seemed the horror was over. Happy music, rescue in action, and all. Was it all a dream? Or did it really happen? Whichever interpretation you prefer, Alice's story continued over into the sequel, albeit briefly. Her cameo appearance made her the first official on-screen victim of the fledgling mass murderer, the one and only Jason Voorhees. And interestingly enough, this one was far more premeditated than any other Jason kill in the franchise, where he did the necessary detective work and travel to hunt poor Alice down. That Jason was cool as an assassin. Indeed, he even had the common courtesy to take the boiling kettle off the stovetop. Poor Alice. If Alice represented a final girl with a little more depth and ambition than that goody two-shoes babysitter Laurie Strode, then Ginny Field took things to the next level, perhaps even perfecting the mold that Curtis set into motion. Ginny was brilliantly portrayed by Amy Steele, and the great Steve Miner did a fantastic job directing this one. We learn a few things during Ginny's grand entrance. She's late, but it's due to car troubles, where her sense of responsibility is still on display, calling to let it be known she would be late, and discovering the phones are out. We also quickly learn that Ginny is a bit more than just that hippie Paul's assistant, where the two are clearly involved in some type of relationship. Ginny quickly diffuses the situation with her soothing vibe, and we are additionally informed that she is majoring in child psychology. She also has quite the sense of humor, where her commanding aura is subtle but present. Ginny simply exudes confidence, particularly in her scenes with Paul. In addition to being charismatic and smart, Ginny is also a well-conditioned athlete, easily leading the run where many struggled and struggled badly. Ginny also proved to be mighty handy, like Alice before her, proving the two had more in common than simply having a thing for her respective hippie head counselor boss. Ginny's defining trait emerged when she was contemplating the type of relationship Jason must have had with his mother. While Paul insisted Jason was just a legend, Ginny was thinking outside the box because she had a knack for understanding and wanting to understand what made people tick. Paul being the prime example, where she could easily sway his mood with her natural charm. Ginny contemplated beyond the legend, and this foreshadowed things to come. When Ginny and Paul returned to Packanack, her inner alarm bells went off, and she sensed growing danger long before Paul had a clue. Indeed, someone was in the room, and to his credit, the hippie did his best to fight off an inexperienced Jason. Thus begins the final chase sequence, where the stakes are more horrifying with the powerhouse Jason besting Paul right before her very eyes. And what a final chase it was, where Ginny literally does it all. First, she tries outwitting Jason for a quick escape, but Jason outsmarts her. She locks herself in the next room, prepares to take a stand, but the pitchfork prompts her to quickly change her mind. Ginny then inexplicably looks to hide in the pantry, which was already occupied by Crazy Ralph. Poor Ralph. So she hops out a window, runs to her car, and wouldn't you know it, the darn thing wouldn't start. The pitchfork reemerges, and Ginny kicks the car door open and Jason gets sent flying away. Next thing you know, Ginny is hiding behind a bush. Jason comes storming after her, and Ginny violently kicks him in the nuts. A game of hide and seek ensues, and just when you think Ginny is giving him the slip, Jason tries to do a crazy diving sneak attack, but he misses the mark. Then he charges forward like a maniac, and Ginny again has the advantage in this back and forth battle. Ultimately, Ginny is hiding under a bed, and she gets frightened by a rodent, which causes her to briefly lose control where she wet herself. Jason pretends to leave, and when Ginny emerges, Jason is ready to pounce. But it's another mishap for the trickster killer, as the darn chair collapses and his pitchfork is broken. Ginny then attempts to attack Jason with a chainsaw, but her efforts are quickly thwarted, so she smashes a chair on him and inexplicably takes off again. As fate would have it, she winds up in Jason's living quarters, with the shrine dedicated to his beloved mother. With quick thinking on the fly, and the aid of the dirty old sweater hanging near the severed head of dearest mom, Ginny tries playing the old psychology game with Jason, and she plays him as easily and effectively as she does Paul. But Ginny leaned in a bit too far. The jig was up, Ginny got wounded, and then all of a sudden, Paul is back. The hippie is ready and all fired up for the rematch, and he distracts Jason just long enough that Ginny delivers the fatal blow. Or was it? The scene with Muffin was a playback on Alice in the Canoe, and always the trickster with a flair for the dramatic. This time Jason crashed the happy music party by smashing through a window. Again, was it a dream? Did it really happen? Either way, Ginny wound up being the first Jason survivor to date who was never killed in a sequel to this point in time, assuming that is, that Paul is dead. The leading lady in part 3 was Chris Higgins, played by Dana Kimmell, and once again we had the great Steve Miner directing. Right out of the gate, Chris was different from Alice and Ginny. For starters, she surrounded herself with a bunch of random deadbeat broken downs and burnout hippies, which felt out of character for her. She reunited with her old flame Rick, and their encounter is awkward because Chris feels out of place after a 2-year absence. Chris is on edge and easily spooked. Between Shelley being an uncouth jokester and Chris being otherwise overly suspicious of her surroundings, she has a rough go of it. The only person who seems to provide her with any real comfort is Debbie. Chris later reveals that she was attacked by Jason 2 years earlier, which makes her an interesting case. A past survivor of Jason, but not Ginny, whose encounter with Jason we already knew, but a survivor whose encounter with Jason is left largely unknown, save for some quick overlay flashbacks. By the time Chris and Rick return to Higgins Haven, Jason has already murdered everyone else in their crew, and before long Rick himself is eliminated, just a few feet in front of her. Cool as an assassin, indeed. Chris is suspicious and on high alert, and ultimately she realizes she is in life-threatening danger when a strung-up victim falls from a tree. Chris puts up a piss-poor barricade, and then she locks a window and hopes for the best. But Jason makes a grand entrance, tossing a body through a window before following his way inside. The chase is on, and it's a damn good one. The fact that Chris came into this story overcoming a traumatic event made her feel even more vulnerable here than Alice and Ginny before her. And at the same time, in her hysterical state driven by a fight for survival, in some ways Chris was perhaps proving more formidable with her wild side. Her fighting spirit is admirably on display, and she was giving Jason one hell of a fight. Amazingly, the van actually starts, and Chris tries running him over, but Jason exhibits some smooth and elusive maneuvering to dodge. But that darn bridge causes a problem as the tank hits empty, and by the time Chris remembers the reserve tank, it's too late. Chris escapes and proceeds to hide out in the barn, and she accidentally comes crashing down onto a perplexed Jason. Chris later nails him really hard with a shovel in a sneak attack before literally hanging him. Turns out Jason is fine, however. He reveals his face to Chris, and she recognizes him as the same man who previously attacked her. Ultimately, a late save from motorcycle gang leader Ali buys Chris the time she needs to bury an axe into Jason's head. No happy music this time around, and Chris sees Jason rise from the dead before ultimately being pulled beneath the water by the decomposing, re-headed corpse of Mrs. Voorhees. But this time it was clearly an hysterical delusion not open to interpretation. Like Ginny before her, Chris survived Jason, and to date she has never been killed off in a sequel. Friday the 13th, the final chapter, was a perfectly executed ending for the saga, and Trish Jarvis was an incredible leading lady to that end. This time Joseph Zito was in the director's chair, and Tom Savini poetically returned to destroy his original creation. Right out of the gate, Trish was unique. Unlike the mighty trio before her, Trish was a local, living with her single mother, her kid brother Tommy, and their dog Gordon. Trish doesn't seem to have much of a social life, but she loves her family, she's in good condition, as evidenced by her jogging routine adventures with Mom, and she is a wonderful big sister to her kid brother Tommy. Trish isn't handy with cars, but Tommy apparently knows a thing or two, and ultimately Rob saves the day and the car. Trish seems mighty interested in the helpful young gentleman, and she brings him home to meet Mom. Even Tommy loves this new fella. Trish extends him an open invitation, and soon after, Jason predictably starts murdering off all of the vacationing party animals. Jason also gets to Trish's mother in the midst of his kill streak. When Trish and Tommy realize their mother is missing and something is amiss, Trish seeks out Rob, and Rob nearly kills her with a machete when he discovers someone is occupying his tent. By the time they get back to the house, everyone across the way is dead. No more party animals. Jason disables the phone lines before they could call for help. The budding couple go to investigate next door, and before long, poor Rob gets killed, repeatedly exclaiming, "He's killing me!" The chase is on, and Trish was up to the challenge. It was a hell of a chase. What made the dynamics of this chase even more intense than the previous chases was the simple fact that there was more at stake here. Trish wasn't just fighting for her own life, for her own survival, but her primary goal was protecting her kid brother, which, in a very real way, makes Trish's actions even more heroic than those of her mighty trio of predecessors. When Jason grabs Tommy through the window, Trish's fighting spirit takes over in defense of Tommy. When the two are hiding out in a lightly barricaded room, Trish smashes a monitor over Jason's head, which briefly incapacitates him. When he comes to, directly in between the two of them, Trish bravely provokes Jason to follow her so that she can lead him out of the house and provide Tommy with an opening to escape. Trish runs back across to the house of the doomed, Jason following every step of the way, and she winds up making a crazy jump through a window to temporarily escape the wrath of Jason. When Trish gingerly returns home, she is mighty perturbed to discover Tommy hasn't left and has plans of his own. Trish resumes bravely battling Jason for all she is worth, and when he gains an advantage, Tommy busts in and distracts him. Trish botches her attempt at a sneak attack kill. The mask comes flying off, and Tommy ultimately saves the day and slays Jason. In the final moments, Tommy unleashes hell on Jason, and Trish is concerned about her brother right to the end. It was a beautiful ending to the self-contained saga that was the original 4 Friday the 13th films, and the original 4 final girls put forth a tremendous effort all around. That's not to dismiss the efforts of their successors. I thought Pam was a pretty interesting character, although she wasn't a final girl in the traditional sense. She was accompanied by both Reggie the Reckless and Tommy Jarvis, and also, it wasn't even Jason. It was Roy the Imposter. Then with Megan from Part 6, she wasn't a traditional final girl either. No big chase sequence, and a lot of people survived Jason at the end of that one, and Jason was no longer even human, but rather more monster by then. And then even Tina from Part 7, she was special in a way that made this one more of a Clash of the Titans type of battle, where she had supernatural powers in her own right that made her something very different, which was fitting considering how overpowered zombie Jason had become by then. But those first 4 Friday the 13th films were a self-contained work of art, where you had the circularity of everything starting with Mrs. Voorhees seeking revenge for the negligent drowning of her poor son Jason, and in the end Tommy Jarvis slayed Jason, the man who just so happened to murder his mother. Then the whole thing with Tom Savini creating Jason in the original, and then coming back and killing him off in the most epic ending imaginable. There is also something to be said for the fact that Jason was basically more human in those original 4 films. He could be hurt and incapacitated, but he could likewise run pretty fast. And he was a really tricky trickster with his wide array of sneak attack formations. Those 4 movies were all very well done. And the 4 final girls, Alice Hardy, portrayed by Adrienne King, Ginny Field, portrayed by Amy Steele, Chris Higgins, portrayed by Dana Kimmell, and last but not least, Trish Jarvis, portrayed by Kimberly Beck. All 4 of these actresses did an outstanding job, where I believe they all made tangible contributions to the early evolution of the final girl archetype. All 4 of them represented strong and heroic independent women who were both resourceful and formidable long before strong female characters became trendy and popular. It's even more interesting when you consider in the first film, the antagonist wound up being a woman herself, which is very damn interesting. Alice was a talented artist unsure of her direction in life, but she was a dedicated person who could more than fend for herself. Ginny was a charismatic and intelligent young woman whose inner strength and determination was the stuff of legend. Chris was a traumatized soul who sought to get her life back on track by facing her past, and she persevered and overcame adversity in triumphant fashion. And Trish was the personification of an awesome and heroic big sister who willingly put herself in danger with the hope of saving her beloved kid brother. All of them were extremely likable, all of them were extremely easy to root for, and all of them were complete and total badasses. Each and every one of them. Between the 4, horror movies are still playing with these archetypes today, as though they represented the 4 corners of possibility, and every other final girl takes place somewhere in the middle. Jamie Lee Curtis may have been the gold standard who best helped define the mold. But Adrienne King, Amy Steele, Dana Kimmell, and Kimberly Beck all contributed to the evolution and growth of that final girl prototype. And they are all outstanding scream queens in their own right. Absolute legends of the slasher subgenre. Thank you to all 4 awesome ladies for your wonderful contributions to horror cinema. I, for one, still celebrate your efforts. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed and have a wonderful night. This is Rummy's Horror Review.